All right, so next up is Karen Offen, who will be speaking on Charles Turgeon's Le Féminisme français, 1902, an analysis of the work and its reception. She is senior scholar with the Clayman Institute for Gender Research at Stanford University, and author, among many works, of European feminism, 1700 to 1950, political history, and has recently published these two beautiful volumes, both from Cambridge University Press, The Woman Question in France, 1400 to 1870, and Debating the Woman Question in the Third Republic, 1870 to 1920.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And as a little self-advertisement, I want to say that these books will be on display in the book exhibit, but not, unfortunately, with Scholar's Choice. But I will get them out there. And there are also flyers that are available. They're in the back of the room, and they'll be out near the book display later today.
Karen, is your mic on?
It is on. Yeah, okay.
That's fine. Actually, Sarah, could you just put hers on the... Yeah, sure.
Okay. Anyway, I won't repeat what I just said, except the flyers and the books will be on display later today. Charles Turgeon. Some of you have heard of him, some of you have not, I'm sure. But early in 1902, complementing a string of publications concerning the history of feminism and the anthropological past and present of women, a dense two-volume study, Le Féminisme français, appeared in French bookshops. The author of this weighty tome, actually two fat volumes, each one nearly 500 pages long, was Charles Turgeon, born in 1855, a middle-aged professor of political economy and dean of the Faculty of Law in Rennes. He was also a correspondent for the Académie des Sciences Morales et Politiques in Paris. In this learned study, which was subsequently crowned by a 500 franc prize from the Académie Française, Turgeon argued that feminism in France must not and cannot be ignored. Cannot be ignored particularly because it implicates, quote, the very constitution of the family, and that, quote, both the demanders and the defenders are both judge and party in the case. The author posited that feminist demands, quote, threaten to seriously trouble the existing social and familial order, unquote. Approaching the subject from a moderate Christian perspective, he was clearly perturbed by aspects of feminism that he considered to be violations of biblical law. But he was haunted as well by what he perceived to be challenges to French cultural specificity and the much vaunted Gallic spirit. Le Féminisme français is a dense and argumentative book, and it is impossible to do full justice to all 1,000 pages here. It is deeply researched, well documented, and remarkably comprehensive, touching on virtually all the issues under discussion at the turn of the century. And it is as well informed concerning the general context as it is in the close reading of feminist publications through 1900. The work is presented as reasonable and equitably impartial. And we'll see how that goes. At the outset, though, clearly speaking from a male perspective, Turgeon sounds cautiously pro-feminist, but then he quickly states that in his opinion, some advocates of women's emancipation have gone too far, especially those who seek to exercise masculine professions. Guess who he's talking about? The lawyers and the doctors. Cutting to the chase, he insists that these ladies and demoiselles take on science in order to lift woman up in society and attack marriage more or less openly in order to lower man in the family. Tout le féminisme est là, he declared. He feared that the threat of war between the sexes as much as, or even more than, the threat of socialism. Turgeon admitted to being impressed by the extraordinary scope of feminism, as well as its international reach. Today, he said, we have a feminist propaganda, a feminist literature, feminist clubs, a feminist theater, a feminist press, headed by a major newspaper, La Fronde, whose projectiles whiz past our ears every day and fall with great fracas in the gardens of Peter and Paul, without heed to the quality or status of the owners. We know, moreover, that feminism has its unions and its councils, and that every year it holds its plenary sessions in a major city of the world, or the old or new. It has become international." Unquote. He qualified the feminist grievances in terms of reaction to women's inferiority on 7 counts: intellect, pedagogy, economics, electoral, civil, conjugal, and maternal. The last 3 having to do with the legal subordination of married women. He boiled these 7 categories down to 2. He should have had a spreadsheet. The first being individual emancipation and social emancipation, and secondly, political and familial emancipation. Individual emancipation, he said, was sought through education, whereas social emancipation was sought through paid employment. The latter, that is, women's right to work for pay, especially in the professions dominated to date by men, had clearly become a sticking point. Charles Turgeon opined that even though the word feminism might well be French, though he wrongly attributed it to Fourier, as had Marius Cheliga in 1896, the absurd phenomenon seemed to him actually to be American in origin. Its scope, in his view, was very widespread, and he distinguished 4 categories: a worker feminism, a bourgeois feminism, a mondaine feminism, and a professional feminism. Each, he insisted, had as its goal the shrinking of male privilege and authority, about which the author exhibited considerable ambivalence. Here he was totally on the mark. Challenging masculine domination is the core feature of feminism, whether or not it is overtly acknowledged. Turgeon was harshest on mondaine feminism, where he saw examples of la femme libre, whose greatest pleasure is playing with moral fire. He attributed such risky behavior to the contagion of bad examples, most of which appeared to be Anglo-American, in other words, un-French. He had nothing good to say about New Women or about the so-called professional feminists, who, in his opinion, stood for free love, the suppression of marriage, and the overthrow of the family. His chapters 5 and 6 abound with observations critical of such women, especially the overeducated intellectual proletariat of women. Indeed, the author speaks of the revenge of the old maids. Turgeon's invective became particularly virulent on the subject of young women pursuing physical culture, sport, riding bicycles, and especially engaging in travestissement, or cross-dressing, or even the adoption of certain elements of male costume. He warned his readers ominously that the more women try to imitate men, the more they will lose their influence over men. Such statements as this one, concerning a loss of femininity leading to a loss of influence, would become a commonplace among anti-feminist men and some women, Colette Yver, I believe, being one of them. Charles Turgeon further identified 3 strands of feminism: revolutionary, Christian, and independent, which he would subsequently refer to in his 5th chapter in a different order as left, right, and center. In the first category, he insisted that socialist efforts since 1896 to capture feminism and to castigate proletarian women for cooperating with bourgeois women were simply about annexing women in order to assault the rich. As for Christian feminism, with which he was clearly more sympathetic, he expressed his doubts, though he did insist on the historic role of Christianity in decreeing the equality of women and men before God. Moreover, he emphasized the importance of the Catholic dogma of the Immaculate Conception, promulgated in the 1850s, for glorifying the female sex. The Church's identification of Eve with sin notwithstanding, he believed that the entire spirit of Church doctrine had led to the rehabilitation of the wife and the glorification of the mother. Nevertheless, he admitted, the Christian tradition had never endorsed equality between husband and wife. He praised Catholic feminists for resisting the virus of secular feminism. He subsequently agreed with the Vatican's objections to women's work in industry and judged the protective law of 1892 to be in conformity with the spirit of Leo XIII's 1892 encyclical on work, Rerum Novarum. Turgeon further acknowledged that there could be feminists of both sexes, which of course there were, but he was particularly critical of what he considered to be the exalted views of male feminists such as Jules Bois and Louis Franck. He also strongly excoriated the contemporary interest of some feminists, for example, Jean Deflue and the group Français d'études féministes, in matriarchy and their ostensible attribution of all good qualities to women. This is in reference to Deflue's group's translation of the introduction to Burckhardt. Yeah.
Bachoffen's work on making
Bachoffen's famous book. He assessed the contribution of various groups, individuals, and congresses of 1900. He blamed these feminists for fomenting an quote-unquote unfortunate hostility between the two sexes that constitute the human family. Feminism tends to disunite that which nature has manifestly wanted to associate. In fact, he reminded readers, every strain of feminism is attacking more or less directly the current prerogatives of man. Or more precisely, the prerogatives and privileges that contemporary French men preferred to think of as normal and constitutive of their masculine identity. But after some steamy analysis of qualities that repelled him, Turgeon calmed down again and insisted that men must, in fact, judge the feminist phenomenon using their reason, that is to say, with cool heads, admitting the reasonable and just demands while condemning those that are excessive. Above all, he cautioned readers must not opt wholly for or against feminism. Turgeon insisted on and frequently reiterated his belief in the importance of sexual complementarity, of cooperation within the couple. In his view, the rights of the individual must cede to the rights of the species, of the family, of society. This subordination of the parts to the harmony of the whole should neither wound nor humiliate anyone. The sexes are not made to struggle separately, and even less to be jealous of one another and to combat one another in pursuit of egotistical satisfaction, which would imperil the future of the race. He allowed that women should be legally everything she can be naturally, nothing more, nothing less. Equality in every aspect, but also reciprocal coordination, equal consideration, and solidarity for the greater good. Competition between the sexes found no favor in his eyes. This may be relational thinking, but it is not relational feminism. The author does ultimately acknowledge male superiority in intelligence, genius, and so forth, but insists on grace as God's sovereign gift to women. Turgeon's account of women's education in his 6th chapter resonates with all the old anti-feminist commonplaces about femme savante, barbe bleue, l'éternel blessé, cet être artificiellement virilisé. And in his chapter 7, he invokes the time-honored saying, les femmes font les mœurs, accompanied by an undisguised nostalgia for the innocence of the old model jeune fille française and la femme vraiment femme. Although he recognized that some women must earn their own keep, he contradicts his earlier endorsement of equality in every aspect by dismissing outright the idea of the equality of the sexes. He waxes lyric about the natural differences between the sexes and how these inevitably necessitate a sexual division of labor. Wives and mothers, those are the two functions of woman, the alpha and omega of her destiny. He does not stand outside the society in which he lives sufficiently to allow him to appreciate the feminist critique of fundamental problems in the construction of the relations of the sexes, but simply calls for women of leisure to engage less in frivolity and more in patching up social problems through charitable activities. Moreover, even as he admits the right of needy women to seek remunerative employments, especially in sedentary jobs, he depicts the aspirations of younger educated women to white-collar jobs as an invasion of the offices, the courtrooms, and all of their employments. You get the picture. His views are quite conflicted. And to be sure, Turgeon's views of women can in many respects be considered anti-feminist, although for the most part his language seems relatively moderate in comparison with some of his predecessors, think Proudhon, and even more with respect to the most vociferous of his successors, for example, Theodore Joran. He seems to be trying hard to be objective, but it is clear where his heart lies. As concerned political rights, Turgeon admits in his second volume that adult women should have the vote as a matter of equity, and he argues adamantly that the so-called universal suffrage should become truly universal. Our so-called universal suffrage is today only a limited suffrage, a virile privilege, a masculine monopoly. Citing reports of the positive effects of women's vote in America and Australia, I think he forgot New Zealand, Turgeon concedes that there are no convincing objections to feminist claims for women's rights to vote, including married women. Importantly, he admits that, in fact, on this issue, the feminists have the best of the argument. But while conceding women's suffrage, he qualifies his generosity by insisting that women should not run for or be elected to public office, even if they could vote. Even so, invoking the hallowed old Roman notion of the office viril that closed off access to public office for women, Turgeon suggests getting rid of it. He approves of the Loi 1897, which gave women the possibility of witnessing civil acts. He argues that women should be eligible to serve as guardians or as members of family councils. Employed women should have equal rights in matters of commerce, including the right of elections to Conseil de Prud'homme. Turgeon even posited that women should be able to vote on the same terms as men, although he didn't think it would happen in our free and gallant country of France. He fully endorsed this suffrage, but not finding convincing any of the arguments against it, including that concerning military service as a qualification. Sovereignty, Turgeon argued, has no masculine essence. Its nature is twofold. It is in some sense male and female. It is bisexual, and that's the word he uses in French. Turgeon was hereby making enormous and authoritative reaches in received opinion. As for the Civil Code's construction of husbandly power, Turgeon, wearing this time his law professor's hat, squarely addressed Article 213, the notorious article that posited wives' obedience, which feminists have been contesting since its inception in the early 19th century. His view on this subject supported the status quo. He wrote that, quote, order is not possible without a certain hierarchy. In a household, he asserted, somebody had to have the last word, otherwise there is no end to the struggles. Equal power for husband and wife, I deny the possibility. He obviously didn't know anything about partnership. For Turgeon, the notion of equal rights stops at the threshold of marriage. Or, as he put it later in the chapter, the civil equality of the two sexes ceases in conjugal relations. By engaging in the ties of marriage, the wife alienates a part of her rights and submits to a sort of temporary incapacity. Husbands, however, retain their rights and capacity. Concerning dowries and the option of community property in marriage, Turgeon favored giving wives more control over community property rather than the separation of property regimes. As for the dowry regime, he thought it should be suppressed. But the earnings of wives who must work must be protected, he admitted, implicitly endorsing the ongoing campaign of l'avant-courrière for the right of married women to control their own earnings. In short, this lengthy treatise addressed many more aspects of the women question, but this account provides the essential of his major arguments. How am I doing on the time?
You were at 17 minutes.
Oh, good, I have time. All right, now we turn just briefly to the reception of this work. In this part I call reception, aftermath, supporters, and antagonists. The Catholic feminist and editor of Le Féminisme chrétien, Marie Mauger, had nothing but praise for Turgeon's book, calling it a monument, almost perfect and definitive. Reviewers of differing persuasions also had many good things to say about it, and in every case, their analyses seem to have helped them to sharpen and solidify their own positions. For example, the writer and literary critic Émile Faguet, recently elected to the Académie Française, launched his Revue Latine in early 1902 with a long essay on feminism inspired by his reading of Turgeon's book. Faguet immediately proclaimed himself a feminist in the liberal tradition of the British philosopher John Stuart Mill, and perhaps, he said, even more so than Turgeon. He hailed Turgeon's book as a classic, the must-read book that dispenses one from reading all the others, unquote. Turgeon's conclusions, Faguet insisted, are formally feminist, although at times he seems to be taking the part of the most hostile anti-feminists, which could and undoubtedly did cause confusion for readers. Faguet pointed to Turgeon's tendency to address the extremist aspects of feminism in ways that made him seem to be taking off on the most bellicose anti-feminist crusade, as, for example, when he critiqued the lyrical extravagances of the Gilles Bois or Léopold Lacour, or for that matter, those of Jean Isolet, or the unfeminine behavior of certain female advocates. But Faguet quickly qualified this criticism by remarking that on certain points, the anti-feminists had some important points to make. The essential elements of feminism, Faguet detailed, lay in the answers to the question, should women be the equal of man in the school, in the family, in the civil life, in social life? Faguet's answer was yes. But in what remained of this very long review essay, it goes on for 30 pages, and this is better than H. France, okay? Faguet posed a distinction between droit and pratique, between right and practice, and addressed the distinctions between them. What he seemed to mean was yes, but, or perhaps he meant yes, but not now. Faguet's witty 30-page essay can be characterized as a personal feminist manifesto. He questioned certain ingrained practices and beliefs, as for example, why the famous division of labor had to be by sex. He pointed out that one of the reasons that so many young women had to support themselves was because young men were not marrying in order to spare themselves the expense of a wife. It's the men's fault, because men are not marrying the women they might have married, become their competition, and drag down their pay. And I've got a lot of other good points in here, but in any case, Faguet did a very extensive reading and critique. A different perspective came from Madame Abadi Darast, who headed the section on legislation of the newly founded Conseil National des Femmes Françaises, the CNFF. She reported positively on Turgeon's book at the annual Conférence de Versailles in 1902, calling the book a veritable encyclopedia of feminism, surprising by its alert and independent style. She remarked that Turgeon was not afraid to become the advocate of a woman's political and familial liberation that would please the most convinced feminists. She had interpreted the fact that the book and its author had been recognized by the Académie Française as a, quote, sign of the times. And the advocate of a wise feminism, one who's comfortable in quoting both Victor Hugo and Ibsen on the coming revolution. Her report focused on the author's treatment of Christian feminism and on the question of women's employment, pointing out that Turgeon wanted to conserve the monopoly of justice, of judges and courts, for men, and that he frowned on women entering the liberal professions, notably law. Skipping over a number of chapters, Dabadie remarked on Turgeon's conclusions and recommended that her associates get hold of a copy. It is a good book, an excellent book, she underscored. You will gain more maturity in your feminist opinions, more true knowledge, more wise ponderation, she said, by reading Turgeon's book. There was, in her view, and I think she was right for the time, simply no equivalent. Now, in the next few years, several full-length books would appear in print, Notably, Jean Odo de Fleu's book, Le Sexualisme, 1906, with its fierce denunciations of gender prejudice in the French language. This is very interesting. Ingénieur Avril de Saint-Croix, Le Feminism, 1907, which was essentially a handbook for the Conseil National and the French women's movement more generally. But neither was as detailed or as comprehensive as Turgeon's Le Féminisme français. And I invite you to read this book. It was really very interesting. And even though it was in some ways conflicted, it does offer a kind of summa for the time, and one that can serve as a point of reference for many different analyses of the women question in the French Third Republic. Thank you.